Outlaw Tales of Oklahoma by Robert Barr Smith. Chapter 2 The Cook Gang, the Trash of the Territory. Cherokee policeman Sequoia Houston went down dying, and the rest of his posse returned fire, riddling Effie Crittenden's house, shooting at Cherokee Bill Goldsby and the Cook boys, Bill and Jim. As Indians, Cherokee Bill and the two Cooks were entitled to tribal land claim payments by the federal government to be picked up at the Cherokee capital of Tahlequah. But because they were wanted by the law, they had anticipated some difficulty collecting the payments in person. They gave written permission to Elfie Crittenden to collect their shares. The Cherokee posse got wind of this and rode off to Effie's home, hoping to collect the outlaws. In the gunfight that followed, Effie prudently crawled behind the cook stove while the bullets flew. Houston, a respected full-blood member of the Cherokee police, was shot down in the gunfight. This group of Cherokee police, often called the Light Horse, vowed revenge. The cook's sister, Lou, saddled their horses for the men as they fought off the law, helping them escape. They got away all right, but not unscathed. Jim Cook took 8 buckshot pellets in his body. The story goes that Effie asked if Goldsby was part of the outlaw gang. When asked if Goldsby was part of the outlaw gang, said, "No, it was Cherokee Bill." It's a nice story, but in all probability, Goldsby had carried his famous handle long before. He may have been referred to by that name on this bloody day. Now the pursuit was joined by an angry group of Houston's relatives and friends. While the local doctor who patched up Jim Cook did his work at gunpoint, the other outlaws threatened the doctor with death if he told anybody that they had visited him. But the three were soon seen crossing the Arkansas on a ferry. A gunfight between Cherokee Bill and Deputy U.S. Marshal John McGill soon followed. Neither man was hurt, and the two unwounded outlaws fled when McGill was reinforced. Jim Cook couldn't run, however, and was captured. As the Muskogee Indian Journal put it, "Shot as nearly to pieces as it is impossible to be and live." He was shot nearly to pieces as it is impossible to be and live. He was withheld to be tried for murder by the Cherokee tribal court at Tahlequah. Like most Western outlaw bands, the Cook Gang was a collection of losers, banded together to steal what honest people earned, quite willing to kill any poor soul who got in their way. For sheer meanness, their only close rivals were the vicious Buck Gang. More about them later. The Cooks never partook of the sort of lasting notoriety showered on other equally contemptible but more colorful gangs. The James Younger and Dalton gangs stole the spotlight, but nobody cared much about the Cooks. Like most of the outlaws of the time, most of them ended up dead early in life. The Cooks were named after their leader, William Tuttle Cook, inevitably called Bill. The gang's heyday was the mid-1890s, and for a time they were such a pestilence that men and women feared to travel the roads and paths of the Eastern Territory, even in broad daylight. The Cooks bore not the slightest resemblance to Robin Hood. They robbed anybody of anything and made no distinction between rich and poor, Indian and white. Bill Cook was 1/8 Cherokee, growing up over on the Neosho River north of Fort Gibson. His first brush with the law was on a charge of selling whiskey, a federal offense in Indian Territory. He could have stopped there, but he didn't. For a while, he punched cattle and even worked as a posse man for a federal deputy marshal, Will Smith. But in 1894, his kid brother Jim was charged with larceny and then compounded the problem by jumping bail. Bill joined him, a demonstration of his proclivity for the wrong side of the law. The two soon joined forces with a longtime acquaintance, Crawford Goldsby. Goldsby was a handsome young man of mixed blood, in various proportions Cherokee, Sioux, white, black, and Mexican. Deserted by his father, ignored by a stepfather, cordially disliked by his elder sister's husband, Mose Brown, he grew up wild. He rejoiced in an exotic handle acquired someplace early in life. He was called Cherokee Bill. In 1892, he was hanging around the town of Catoosa, working in a livery stable, and at whatever else came his way. He could not have been content with this workday, law-abiding existence. In those days, Catoosa was a wild and woolly settlement, a railhead town that received the trail herds out of Texas. With the cattle came cowboys, young, full of beans, hungry for whiskey and the pleasures of the bedroom, ready for a fight or a frolic. Trouble was easy to find on Catoosa streets and in its saloons. It was Cherokee Bill's kind of town. In Catoosa, Bill met a couple of charter members of the gang. Thurman Skeeter Baldwin was a cowboy in his mid-20s. Sam Williams was a 17-year-old wannabe rustler who answered to the Verdigris Kid, or Mosquito. Toward the end of 1893, Cherokee Bill attended a dance in Fort Gibson and quarreled over a girl with whom he was enamored, no doubt fueled by whiskey. The end of it was a fist fight in which Cherokee Bill was decisively pummeled by a freed man, Jake Lewis. Next day, a vengeful Cherokee Bill renewed the fight, but this time there were no fists. He simply ambushed his rival in a stable and drove 2 pistol bullets into Lewis. Lewis survived, but Cherokee Bill did not wait around to discuss the rights and wrongs of the incident. Instead, he prudently fled and joined up with Bill Cook and his brother Jim Skeeter Baldwin, and other equally worthless hoodlums. The gang went off stealing horses and dodging the law because Cherokee Bill knew nearly every pig trail of the Indian Territory. Friends urged Cherokee Bill to surrender, a logical and prudent notion. Both he and Lewis were Cherokee freedmen, so the Cherokee court had jurisdiction, and the sentence would probably be relatively light. Cherokee Bill elected to stay on the run. And then, in the spring of 1894, came the payment of the Cherokee strip money, almost $7 million of compensation for lost territory to be paid to members of the Cherokee Nation at Tahlequah. Besides the payees and legitimate businessmen, Tahlequah swarmed with snake oil salesmen, gamblers, whiskey sellers, thieves, a man who ran a steam-driven merry-go-round, and an assortment of feather merchants offering all manner of things on credit. Violence inevitably followed. Among the more serious offenses were a stage holdup and the murder of a woman by one Levi Sanders, promptly shot dead by his victim's son. The murder of Houston by the Cooks angered the Cherokee Nation, whose police would never forget. Now, Cook and Cherokee Bill were wanted men, and if they had any sense at all, they would have left Indian Territory altogether. But instead of fleeing, they made outlawry a full-time business. With the Verdigris Kid and Skeeter Baldwin, they set out to make a career of oppressing the righteous. To these they added other outlaws and would-be felons: Lon Gordon, Jess Snyder, a.k.a. Buck, Elmer Lucas, a.k.a. Chicken, Kurt Dayson, Jim French, a killer called Bus Lucky, George Sanders, and Henry Munson, a penitentiary alumnus who dubbed himself Texas Jack Star. George Sanders, brother of the late unlamented murderer Levi, was a particularly vicious sort. He'd once robbed a man by holding a revolver to his victim's baby's head, threatening to kill it if the man did not give up his money. French had already tried to kill a couple of people, and was also wanted for mail robbery. This collection was commonly referred to as the Cook Gang, although its members committed their crimes in pairs and small bunches about as often as they defied the law en masse. In July, in July of 1894, for example, Cherokee Bill and Jim French held up the general store in Little Wetumpka. In the same month, Cherokee Bill and Munson robbed Dick Richards, a railroad station agent at Nowata. True to his salt, Richards went for his pistol, and Cherokee Bill shot him in the neck and killed him. Less than a day later, 6 outlaws stopped at Muskogee, Fort Gibson stage and robbed the passengers. The hold-up men wore masks, but the press concluded, probably correctly, that the evildoers were the Cook gang. About an hour later, the same bunch robbed a well-known Cherokee man. Still, in July, the depot at Illinois was robbed once, the Fort Gibson depot twice, and a man from the hamlet of Muldrow murdered and robbed of about $1,000. At mid-month, the gang held up a Frisco train at a tiny place called Red Fork. This time, the haul was meager, a few dollars, a box of cigars, and a jug of whiskey. None of the gang inspected the express agent's receipt book, into which he had stuffed a large amount of cash. So far, the gang's hold-ups had been easy, no doubt inflating their own opinion of themselves. But now all of that was about to change. At the end of July, they barged into the Lincoln County Bank in Chandler, only to find that the time lock on the bank safe was still set. When a sick bank employee ordered to open the safe fainted from his illness, one of the frustrated outlaws took a shot at the man as he lay on the floor. The next mistake was both callous and stupid. They killed the popular town barber, shooting him down simply because he shouted that the bank was being robbed. The shot, far more likely than a yell to alert the town, brought on Sheriff Claude Parker. Parker stood boldly in the middle of the street and emptied his pistol at the outlaws, hitting one horse and one man. Parker then raised a small posse and pursued. More shooting followed, and 4 miles out of town the posse collected Chicken Lucas, shot in both legs and probably displeased that the gang had galloped off and left him, taking his horse with them. While he was in the Guthrie lockup, Lucas kept talking. The 2 other robbers, he said, had been Bill Cook, Cherokee Bill, Gordon, and Munson. And he helpfully volunteered the information that had ridden along on the Red Fork train robbery. He had ridden along on the Red Fork train robbery. The gang surfaced again on August 2nd, and on that day, a tough band of Yuchi Indians jumped them at the home of Munson's uncle. In the battle that followed, Munson was killed and Kurt Dayson captured. Lon Gordon took a round through the lungs and died shortly afterward in Sapulpa. Cook, Snyder, Baldwin, and Cherokee Bill got away. In early September, Jim French and one Meigs decided to hold up a Robert Bean at his home near Tahlequah. They called Bean from his house, and he obliged them by coming out. But the trouble was that he came out smoking, guns firing. He shot Meigs in the chest, and the outlaws fled empty-handed. Then, on the night of September 14th, Cook, Snyder, Baldwin, and Cherokee Bill rode into Okmulgee. Much of the town being absent at a baseball game, they had little trouble robbing some $600 from the local store. Next, they attacked the depot at Fort Gibson, got another $300, and galloped out of town spraying bullets. The next day, they robbed a lone traveler and then split up. Cook and 2 other outlaws then robbed a group of coal miners of whatever pittance they may have had. They missed a real haul in Claremore when the station agent, warned that suspicious-looking riders were coming to town, prudently evacuated the funds on the outbound train. The gang left empty-handed. 20 miles away at Choteau, they got a sack of silver and gold and silver certificates from the American Express agent. They also robbed a railroad employee of a measly $35. By now, the honest people of Eastern Indian Territory had had a great bellyful of the Cooks. One politician told the Kansas City Times that people are afraid to travel, which was understandable in view of the gang's propensity for robbing anybody and anything. One cable to the Indian Affairs Administration in Washington pleaded that affairs here are in a desperate condition. Business is suspended, and the people generally intimidated, and private individuals robbed every day and night. A Muskogee resident remembered a friend placing a 6 gun on the table and commenting, "I understand the Cook gang is coming in tonight." Muskogee merchants organized a home guard and installed an alarm system to alert the defenders. According to the Fort Smith Indian Journal, U.S. Marshal George Crump offered $250 a head reward for Cook gang members, dead or alive. His offer named, besides Cook and Cherokee Bill, an astonishing number of wanted men, including Bill Doolin, the Slaughter Kid, a sobriquet of Bitter Creek Newcomb, and a host of lesser lights. Now, the lawlessness got even worse. On October 20, the gang wrecked a Katy, Missouri, Kansas, Texas railroad. The gang wrecked a Katy train at a town called Coretta, throwing a switch and sending the train smashing into a line of boxcars on the siding. Firing their weapons, presumably to cow the passengers, the gang robbed the express car of about $500 and then went through the train robbing individual passengers. By this time, the gang's depredations were hurting the economy of Eastern Indian Territory. Travelers left their valuables at home whenever they could. Banks charged a premium for issuing negotiable drafts. Pacific Express suspended its money order business. Many businessmen closed at nightfall, and businessmen who had to move money concealed it in various ingenious ways. The state capital newspaper reported that one traveling man brought $3,000 out sealed in a horse collar. Another drummer brought out $1,500 in the bottom of a sack of oats. Things were so bad that the Indian agent at Muskogee wired Washington, asking for military help to break what he called the state of siege. The gang's crimes were prime fodder for the many people who wanted all of Oklahoma made a state. Newspapers both in and out of the territory clamored for statehood as the sovereign remedy for this crime wave. "How much longer?" grumbled the Afton Weekly Herald. "How much longer is Bill Cook going to be allowed to terrorize the Indian Territory?" Still not smart enough, or maybe too arrogant, to leave the territory, the gang split up again and went right on with their crimes. Cook, Baldwin, Snyder, and one William Ferris robbed a trading post on November 2nd, and 2 days later held up an immigrant family on the road. The Verdigris Kid and Cherokee Bill rode into the town of Lenape and went into the Sheffield store, where they forced Sheffield to open the safe. They cleaned out the safe and robbed the owner as well, stole some merchandise and ammunition, and held up the post office for good measure. And here tragedy struck. When a harmless man working next door looked into Sheffield's from a window, Cherokee Bill wantonly killed him with a single rifle round. The outlaws made a clean getaway, but the deputy marshals used an informer to locate the pair. A posse led by the formidable Heck Bruner and Heck Thomas found them at a house up on the Caney River. In the inevitable firefight that followed, somebody got a bullet into Cherokee Bill's leg, and another bullet killed the Verdigris Kid's horse. A deputy marshal, Jim Carson, was shot in the foot, but Cherokee Bill and the Verdigris Kid managed to get away. The remorseless pursuit by light horse riders and a deputy marshal had at last driven Cook and 4 other outlaws across the Red River into Texas, where they intended to press their to pass their time usefully robbing trains. A suspicious rancher, a suspicious rancher spotted them, however, and thoughtfully wired Company A of the Texas Rangers at Amarillo. Sergeant W. J. L. Sullivan, called John L., collected 5 other Rangers and responded. They silently collared a mounted outlaw sentry and surrounded the building where the gang was hiding. There was an exchange of gunfire, but then the reports from the house fell away into silence. The Rangers broke down the door to find the bandits had fled to the attic. The lawman had heard one of them call out that he wanted to surrender, but somebody else threatened to kill him if he did. Sergeant Sullivan settled the question when he threatened to burn down the house and the gang with it. Cook had gotten away, but the other 4 hoodlums surrendered. The prisoners, having been returned to Fort Smith, turned out to be Baldwin, Snyder, Ferris, and a local recruit, Charles Turner. Skeeter got 30 years, and Ferris and Snyder both got 20, which prompted Skeeter to comment with some bitterness, "What a hell of a court for a man to plead guilty in." Turner was acquitted. Meanwhile, Cherokee Bill had gone to see his stepsister, Maud Brown, at Talala. And while he was there, he got crossways with her husband, Mose, with whom he had always had difficulty. When Mose threatened to talk to the law about Cherokee Bill, or Cherokee Bill thought he was going to, the outlaw put 7 Winchester bullets into Mose, whereof he died. Cherokee Bill celebrated his latest murder by robbing the Kansas-Arkansas Valley Depot at Nowata. Bill Cook still had the remorseless Sergeant Sullivan on his back trail. Cook got as far as Roswell, New Mexico, but on January 11, 1895, the law at last ran him down and took him without a fight. Returned to Fort Smith, he was invited by tough Judge Isaac Parker to spend the next 45 years in prison. While Cook was hearing where he'd soon be living, Jim French and the Verdigris Kid on March 28th stuck up a store in Fort Gibson, helping themselves not only to the available cash, but to new suits and a variety of other clothing. Meanwhile, Cherokee Bill, deeply enamored of a young lady named Maggie Glass, agreed to a rendezvous at the home of her older cousin, one-time Deputy Marshal Ike Rogers. Rogers had been discharged from the marshal's service for conniving with outlaws, and he earnestly wished reinstatement. Marshal Crump promised Rogers that if he would consider the reinstatement if Rogers could help bring in Cherokee Bill. So, in early February of 1895, Rogers enlisted a neighbor, Clint Scales, to help him lay Cherokee Bill by the hills, and invited both Maggie and her suitor to visit him. As always, Cherokee Bill was alert and wary. He did not trust Rogers at all, neither did Maggie, who urged the outlaw to leave. So Cherokee Bill stayed on at Rogers's place and held his Winchester constantly on his knees. He refused a drink of whiskey, which Rogers had thoughtfully spiked with morphine, and the men played cards most of the night. When they finally turned in at about 4 a.m., Rogers shared a bed with Cherokee Bill, but each time Rogers moved, he did also. It was not until after breakfast that Rogers got his chance, when Cherokee Bill rolled a cigarette and reached down to the fireplace for a coal to light with. Rogers bashed him in the head with a chunk of wood. A wild wrestling match followed until Rogers and Scales finally subdued Cherokee Bill. He was taken to Fort Smith and was tried in February 1895, and on April 13th, Judge Parker sentenced him to hang for murder. He was hanged on March 17, 1896. He had no last words, in spite of the oft-repeated fable that when he was asked whether he wanted to say something, he answered, "I came here to die, not to make a speech." When Cherokee Bill was jailed, the next bandit to fall was Jim French. On a bitter cold day in February 1895, Jim French went to Catoosa with a new partner, Jess Cochran, who called himself Kid Swanson, and Bitter Creek Newcomb. They decided to rob the Reynolds General Store and the neophyte Cochran botched the job by firing through the office door to gain admission, then charging through to collect the money. What Cochran collected was a shotgun charge fired by clerk Tommy Watkins. Tommy Watkins, who had been seated inside the office. French fired through the window, mortally wounding the store manager, Sam Irwin, who was lying on a cot in the office. Watkins missed French with his second barrel, leaving him at the bandits' mercy. Enraged at the shooting of Cochran, French was preparing to kill Watkins when the dying Irwin pulled a pistol from beneath his pillow and fired. He drilled French twice in the neck, and the outlaw staggered away from the building, all the fight gone out of him. Leaving his guns behind, French managed to mount and ride to an old cabin about a mile away. As he hobbled through the front door, the residents vamoosed out the back, and a posse appeared led by formidable Watkins and his shotgun. After a few exchanges of gunfire, French was gone for good. To the intense relief of the populace, Deputy Marshal Heck Thomas and a couple of citizens delivered what was left for him to Fort Smith, where his remains were placed on show according to the custom of the time. Learning of French's death from his cell, Bill Cook made a prophetic comment. "He's better off than we are." The rest of the gang's brief history is a largely sordid anticlimax. In the spring of 1897, Cherokee Bill's brother, Clarence, murdered Ike Rogers, captor of his brother. Clarence got away and died much later in St. Louis of tuberculosis. Jim Cook escaped from the Cherokee prison in December of 1896, recruited a couple of second-rate helpers, and staged a largely unproductive crime wave. Jim died with his boots on in 1900, shot down in an argument over the ownership of a steer. His brother Bill, who had started the whole nefarious mess, died in prison in 1900. Now, all that remained of the gang were the bloody memories. Outlaw Tales of Oklahoma by Robert Barr Smith. Chapter 2. The Cook Gang. The Trash of the Territory. Cherokee policeman Sequoia Houston went down dying, and the rest of his posse returned fire, riddling Effie Crittenden's house, shooting at Cherokee Bill Goldsby and the Cook boys, Bill and Jim. As Indians, Cherokee Bill and the two